Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our last session of the SunoikisisDC Digital Classics Summer Term 2026. Today, I'm leading this session because Martina Filosa can't be with us, and she's very sorry about that, but unfortunately she was not able to join us. But anyway, I'm here, I'm back again to Sunoikisis. And as you know, so today, this is our last session for this term, and I'm very happy to introduce Chiara Cenati and Lucia Orlandi. Chiara and Lucia, welcome to SunoikisisDC Digital Classics, and thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And I'm also very happy because today we go back to a topic which is the digital editions of text-bearing objects. In Sunoikisis, we had in the past also many sessions about, text-bearing objects, but today specifically we will we have a session about a great project, and in fact today, and I'm looking at we have a very rich outline in GitHub, as you know, where you have a description of the session, but also of the project that will be presented today, Mappola, mapping out the poetic landscapes of the Roman Empire, an ERC starting grant, and also the ongoing project, Sign It. As a matter of fact, we have two projects. So today, Chiara and Lucia are going to present these two projects, Mappola and then Sign It, Signacula in Roman and post-Roman Italy, marking religious and cultural identity from the 2nd to the 11th century CE, funded by the EU under Horizon. And so, as usual, in GitHub, you have a description, a detailed description of this session with references to the two projects. You have the readings, various resources, and then in the end, an exercise. And Chiara and Lucia will also talk about the exercise. And then, as usual, also for Martina students, so as you know, we have a chat, so you're following us on YouTube. You can write your questions in the chat, and then, of course, at the end of the session, we will be able to answer your questions. And if there is any comments, please, in any case, use the chat. But now it's time to start. And so I can give the floor to Chiara, and I begin to add her slides to StreamYard. And so, Chiara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica, for the introduction, and I would also like to thank Martina for this invitation. I'm very happy to speak at Sunoikisis today. So today I will present the Mappola project and database. Just to make sure we are all on the same page, today we will be speaking about inscriptions. So when speaking about inscriptions, we are dealing with a very broad group of texts written on very different objects. So to give a very simple definition of what an inscription is, I've chosen this very short sentence that an inscription is a text traced upon some hard substance for the sake of durability. Epigraphers operate on multiple levels, and this makes the job quite difficult from time to time. These levels are the archaeological level, the textual level, and the historical one. So when dealing with archaeology, we work with type of monuments, function, material, decoration, provenance. For the text, we provide a transcription of the text, an apparatus criticus, and we discuss all previous editions. And for the historical part, we work mainly on prosopography, so people involved in the monument and the text, and any historical event that is mentioned in the text or that is related to the object we are studying. So all these in a digital edition can be translated in what is the epidoc schema. So all the archaeological part is encoded within the metadata in the TI header. The text is under the text part, and what concerns history can be encoded as semantic metadata, or can be addressed in the commentary of the XML edition. So just to make sure everyone knows, there is an Epidoc template that can be downloaded as XML from the Epidoc page, and I also pasted here a link to it. And I'm sure everybody is already aware of them, but there are Epidoc guidelines available online, and on the GitHub of Epidoc you can find several trainings and tutorials that you can watch at home and on basically every topic that might be necessary when encoding in Epidoc XML. So now to the topic of today's lecture, again, to be sure to be on the same page. The question is, what is a verse inscription? So people might have different opinions about it. In a very strict way, an verse inscription is an inscription that contains verses or consists entirely of a poem. However, epigraphers consider also as verse inscriptions that contain just metrical clauses, so a few metrical bits or other poetic phrases, even if there are no full verses at all. More broadly, we can also treat as verse inscriptions any form of written verbal art. As you see here in the photo that I provided you, here we have an example of a verse inscription. This inscription is composed of a prose part, a poem, and it's closed by another prose part. If you look very closely to the stone, you might see these dashes after the second line and after other 8 more lines. So these dashes are made to separate clearly, also graphically, the prose part from the verse part. Then you have 8 lines of text that follows. I have highlighted them in the slide. These 8 lines form 2 elegiac distichs. So an elegiac distich is composed by an hexameter and a pentameter. That means here we have 1 hexameter, 1 pentameter, 1 hexameter, 1 pentameter, and in total 4 verses. However, these 4 verses are distributed on 8 lines of text. That means that each verse is on 2 lines. So we don't have a correspondence between verse and line. And I am saying this because it will be very important later. So Mappola, so as Monica has already said, the Mappola is short for mapping out the poetic landscapes of the Roman Empire. The project ended in 2024. However, its database is still a big work in progress. So we are still actively working on it every day. So and that's what I am going to talk you about now. So the main goal of the Mappola database is to collect Greek and Latin verse and rhythmical inscriptions from the Roman Empire and to make these inscriptions searchable. So currently we have entered around 1,000 inscriptions that have a complete record The total of verse inscriptions that we want to enter is over 4,000, so we are far from our target, but we keep on working on it. The second goal of Mappola is to enable a combined search of metrical patterns with historical features. That is something that has never been done so far. You see on this slide also the main research questions of the project Mappola. Among these, we have the regional and ethnic diversity, the uses of different social strata, the microhistories and multilingual contexts, and most important, the interdependency of poetic forms and sociocultural diversity. That is basically what we will be able to explore more deeply once we have entered all inscriptions in the database. And finally, the transformations and reinventions of the production and consumes of poetry during the centuries. So how the database works. So the Mappola database has an hybrid architecture that combines a relational and a non-relational database. And this is because we wanted to have an interface that was as more user-friendly as possible in order to be fast in the entering of data. The Mappola database has an interactive map with 2 layers. The first is the present-day geography based on OpenStreetMap, and the second layer is the digital atlas of the Roman Empire. The relational database is implemented with SQL. Epidoc is used only to encode the text, so to transcribe the epigraphic texts. For this, we have integrated in the database the Patrimonium Epidoc converter in order to generate more easily Epidoc compliant XMLs. So the Patrimonium converter, for those who don't know about it, it was developed by the ERC project Patrimonium and is an open source tool that can be used online, and everyone can try it and transform simple Leiden system inscriptions into Epidoc. We are going to see it. The output of all information entered in the database is available in XML format. So what the Mappola database provides, first, the interactive map. That means the inscriptions are not simply displayed on the map, but this map can be used interactively. So, which means that we can search in the normal search mask of the database according to any criteria we want and display the result on the map. This is what you see on this slide. So in this case, I have selected the Roman province of Pannonia Superior and as verse type a dactylic hexameter. And this is on the right of my screen. You can see the result of this search that gives 7 records. Of course, these 7 records are just the inscriptions that we have already entered in the database. So there might be more. The second feature is the verse visualization. As I said before, it's very common in verse inscriptions that verses do not correspond to text lines. So in this case, it's very helpful to have different visualizations of the text, one next to the other. One of these is the diplomatic. The interpretive shows exactly the text in the layout that it has on the stone. So in the case of the inscription we have just seen, we will see the poem distributed on 8 lines. If we switch to the verse visualization, the poem is on 4 lines as corresponding to the 4 verses of the elegiac couplets. Another feature that we implemented in the database is to provide several translations in multiple modern languages. And this because poetry can be interpreted in many different ways according to the person who studies the text and translates. So for us, it's important not just to provide one interpretation of the text, but if possible, to give more than one published translations next to our own translation that is usually always in English and is labeled as main translation. So now I'm going to focus on one monument, and with the help of this monument, we will walk through all the Mappola entries. So this is an altar for the goddess Celestis that was found in Cenati in Dacia, in the province of Dacia, today Romania. The text reads, Celestis mulsa propria placabitur ara, ac divis aliis tura merumque damus. So this is an example of an inscription that can have multiple interpretation. I've given here the most plausible one, that is Celestis will be appeased with her own meat. On this altar, we give to the other gods incense and wine. The verse type of this inscription is again an elegiac couplet, so one hexameter and one pentameter, so 2 verses. However, as you see, these 2 verses are distributed on the stone on 6 different text lines. So let's go through all the information that you find on a single entry in Mappola. So at the very beginning, you have a Mappola ID that is automatically assigned to any new entry, and this is formed by the 3 letters MPL for Mappola and 5 digits. A title and the Trismegistus number, very important when dealing with ancient texts and digital projects. At the very bottom, you have an editing history with the date of the creation of the entry and the person who was responsible for the creation, the work status of the entry, if it's complete, if it's pending, if it's in review, or any other, and the import notice. This is very important. So we have imported many raw data from other projects, and especially the epigraphic database Heidelberg and the epigraphic database Roma. So here we have the information when the raw data from which other project it was imported, and in this case is the Epigraphische Datenbank Heidelberg. All this translates in an XML epidoc file in the very beginning of the document, so in the title statement. So you have all the information I have just presented, and actually also something more. Then next thing is the provenance and the modern location of the inscription. Here you see a lot of information on where the inscription was found and where it's kept today. So the find place is the Colonia Ulpia Traiana Samisretusa. The inscription was found in the area sacra, and today is kept at the Museo de Archeologie with the inventory 1341A, and is more precisely kept in the lapidarium of the museum. Each provenance has a own entry where we give all names of the place, so the ancient name, the modern name. We provide the Roman province and the modern country where this place is located, and IDs of geographical gazetteers in particular Pleiades, the Pleiades ID, the GeoNames ID, that is the gazetteer for modern places, and the Trismegistos places ID. And from Pleiades, when available, we import the coordinates. Otherwise, we import them from GeoNames. This makes it possible to display the inscriptions on the map. And as you see also here on the left, we have this small preview of the inscriptions that have been found at the same location as the inscription that is discussed in the entry. Here you see how the entry would appear in a epidoc file. So you have the place name with the ref that points to the external gazetteer Pleiades, and much more information, including the dating that is, in this case, it's coming from Mappola, but Mappola displays it at the bottom of the record. So then the object description, this is very important part. Here you have different categories like object type, the material, the state of preservation, and the execution technique. For all these terms that we have in a drop-down menu, we use the École vocabularies. So each term is connected to permalink and LOD of the LOD École vocabularies. We use the École vocabularies, but in the last years, a new project has overtaken and cleaned and improved all the École's vocabularies, and this project is fair epigraphy. So if I had to enter a reference to an external vocabulary today, I would use both École and fair epigraphy vocabularies for the categories that are in this vocabulary. So here you see, again, the epidoc XML with all references that point to the external vocabularies. And next is the verse layout. So this is something that we are testing in Mappola. So there are no LODs for all the categories you see here yet. What we mark here in order to it to be searchable is if there is a presence of prose and verse in the text, or if the text is only a poem. So in this case, we have selected Carmen because the inscription we looked at is only a poem. We indicate if there is a change in the layout or in the lettering between prose and verse. So many times the prose part is written in larger characters than the verse part, for example. Then we say if there is a verse line correspondence. So we have seen already that this is very important. Sometimes each verse corresponds to one line. Many times this is not the case. And some other times there is no correspondence. However, the division of the text corresponds to the metrical structure, like in the both inscription we have just seen. And also the last part is about any signs, symbols, or also empty spaces that might be used to simplify the reading of the text or separate prose and verse part. So now we come to the text. So the function of the text also uses the École vocabularies. So you see in the keywords in the epidoc, you see under keywords the term that refers to École. This is really a case where today I would prefer to use fair the epigraphic vocabulary, because they have a very beautiful type of inscription in ontology, and I would invite you to explore it. Then we have a long drop-down list that includes all the possible verses that you might find in a verse inscriptions, and you can select it in order to search for them. So now the encoding part. So how to encode the metrical features. So for that, you have 3 dedicated pages on the EpiDoc guidelines. These pages are currently under update. So in one of these pages, you might find nothing, but in a few weeks, months, hopefully by the next release, this will be updated also according to the new Mappola standards. So I invite you to keep an eye on these pages. The basic tags we use to encode verses and poems are LG and L. LG stands for line group and is used to mark poetic composition. L is line, short for line, is used to mark verses. Additionally, to these tags, the attribute mat with different values is used, so to indicate that the composition is an elegiac couplet. We use the tag LG with the attribute mat value elegiac couplet, and we wrap in it the whole text in this case, and then we wrap the single lines within else with attribute mat. In the first line, we have a dactylic hexameter. The second is a dactylic pentameter. What if you don't know how to identify verses and verse parts? So no fear, because there is an important and very good Italian project, Musisque Deoque, that collects all Latin poetry, and this includes also verse inscriptions. So if you start searching your text in their search engine, for example, in this case, I looked for Celestis, you find the inscriptions you are looking for. All these entries have stable identifiers. And at the bottom of the page, you see that is indicated what type of verse it has. So in this case, it's a elegiac couplet. If you want to learn more about the verses and their metrical scansion, you can click on the top right of your screen on metrical scansion, and this pop-up window opens, and you find the scansion of the verses. The vertical lines, these vertical red lines, indicate pauses in the reading of the text, so metrical pauses, and we are going to go back to them in a second. As I said, the Mappola database implemented the Patrimonium converter. So the Patrimonium converter, so this is the interface you will see if you search for Patrimonium online in your browser. You can enter the text in the Leiden style, and this will be automatically converted with basic EpiDoc tags. So for example, here we have the line break and the expansion of abbreviation. So this is what you see in Mappola. You can do basically the same. You enter the text at the bottom of in this bottom window, and then you can convert it, and it displays the EpiDoc version. To this, we have added a few buttons that allow us to tag more quickly verse and metrical features. So for example, we have a button for LG. So clicking on that, we wrap the text in an LG, and the L button for the tagging the verse. And additionally, we have also different types of verses. So in order to add the values to the mat, so elegiac couplet, hexameter, pentameter. it's possible that you might also want to encode some more metrical features in your text. And for these, we are at the moment experimenting new solutions. For example, so at the second line after the word mul sa, you have a space before the word propria. In this space, there is a dot. You won't see it on the picture. I try also to enlarge it very, very much, but it's very hard to see. But trust me, I saw it. There is a dot there. And this dot corresponds exactly to this vertical red line after that you have in the scansion of Musisque de Oque. So you have mulsa, vertical red line, propria. So there we have a reading pose of the text. So how did we encode it? So we encoded the dot with the G tag, so for glyph. This is a symbol, and it's an interpunct. And we wrap the interpunct within a seg tag, giving it attribute ana and value metrical. So we say that this symbol has a metrical value, and this metrical value is a reading pose. Other ways of using seg for verse inscription might be the using the value extrametrical to mark parts of text that do not belong to the verse. So sometimes we have a full verse, and then in between we have some words that do not belong to the verse. And many times these words are personal names or numbers that do not, is harder to make fit in the metrical structure of the verse. So in this case, we use this seg. So finally, the prosopography. The inscription I've just shown you do not have any person mentioned in the text except from the goddess Celestis. So I've decided to show you the prosopography on the other inscription that we saw at the beginning. So here we have 3 people named in the text. The first is Marcus Romanius Iovinus, Marcus Junius Severus, and Romania Marta. For each person mentioned in the text, Mappola provides an entry, and in this entry we give the name, the gender is very important, the profession, if it's available, the social status, if it's available, and the age, sometimes we have it, and very important is also the role of the person in the monument. So if it's the person who dedicates the monument, or if it's the person to whom the monument is dedicated. All this appears in the output XML of Mappola as a list of persons. So when encoding it, you might want to do this, or even better would be to encode the prosopographical feature in the text directly where the persons are mentioned. And for these, you might want to watch again the tutorials on the Epidoc GitHub about names and persons. So to conclude, actually we are not concluding because there is a lot of work still to be done. So Mappola, as you saw, is still a work in progress. It's a very big project, and we are trying to proceed with it with the means we have here in Vienna. There are fewer than 1,000 inscriptions have been included in Mappola. There are another 1,000 that are in progress, so we are working on them. So we are missing still another 2,000. The next steps are many and go in different directions. One is of course, to expand the corpus, refine the encoding, improving link open data, for example, integrating also the fair epigraphy vocabularies. And of course, we might also decide to develop the interface and its design. And last thing I can tell you is to explore the database and search whatever you're interested on by place, by meter, by language, by historical contexts, and see what is interesting for you, and find an inscription that you might want to encode in your assignment. And finally, just a few words to the assignment, but if you have more questions, you can ask. We are at exercise 2. The assignment consists in encoding in XML one inscription of your choice from the Mapula database. To do that, you can use either Oxygen XML if you have it, or Visual Code, that is an open source software. You can find on the Epidoc website everything you need. So the Epidoc template that is also in the slides to use as a model. You can download the 2 cheat sheets, one for the text and the other one is for the Epidoc structure. And what to encode. So it focus on the metadata, like the provenance, the object type, the material, the typology, the layout features, that do not have any external link, but still you can name them in the layout part. Encode the text using also the LGL tags, and enrich also the text with the prosopographical markup for people mentioned within it. Finally, the visualization. So I have written here the EDUP editor, but of course the EDUP editor is down exactly in these days because they are updating it. So in case, so for the transformation, you can either make a simple transformation with Oxygen, or if you want to try FS, probably you already know it, you can also transform your and visualize your text using FS. I think Martina would be very happy with it. So thank you. I will pass now the word to Lucia.
Okay, so Chiara, thank you very much for this presentation. I think so, and also for talking about the assignment, exercise 2. I'm sure that we will have time at the end to go back to the exercise, but now also for the audience, so we have already information about exercise 2, and you find this at the end of the class outline in GitHub. But now, so we can move on. So I think we can ask questions in the end, because but of course, if there are comments in the meantime, you can write them in the chat. And now, so I'm adding. No, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
No problem. No. It was my mistake. Okay. Yes. Okay.
So just. Oh, sorry. Oh, it's not the good one. Yeah. Here we are. So you should be able to
yes,
see
now
my presentation.
Exactly. Okay,
so I thank you, Monica, and I join Chiara in thanking you and Martina for your kind invitation. So let's start. Let's move to smaller and simpler, smaller objects and simpler text. Let's say with the Signacula in Roman and post-Roman Italy, marking religious and cultural identity from the 2nd to the 11th century CE. This project aims at contributing to the study of the cultural history of the Italian peninsula from the Roman imperial period to the Middle Ages by means of the objects known as signacula, or stamps or markers. And the material we're focusing on has been found, or is supposed to originally come from, a sample of Italian regions that feature both Latin and Greek-speaking communities, and that witnessed to the presence of both the Roman imperial and the Byzantine rule. So we're speaking about the northern, northeast of Italy, Veneto, Emilia-Romagna, but then also, of course, the south, Campania, Puglia, Calabria, and the islands, Sicily and Sardinia. The project stems from three main research questions. How can markers, how can signacula and, broadly speaking, marking practices contribute to the cultural history of Roman and Byzantine Italy? What role did language choice on marking tools play? Was it a matter of utility or more a process of self-representation and identity construction, or both? And third, how did marking practices evolve between the Roman and the Byzantine periods? Now, the data analysis of the project is still work in progress, so today I will focus more on the methodology I used to record and organize the data. What are we talking about with signacula? The signacula are objects bearing text, signs, and or iconographic motifs. They're designed to be stamped on various surfaces, such as wax, bread, cheese, leather, plaster, clay, or by means of ink on harder surfaces. They vary in size and shapes. They're generally made of copper alloy, but we know also ceramic, stone, and wood specimens. And what really characterizes them is that the stamping process ensures that the writing is standardized and therefore well identifiable. So this tool combines information and validations. Their use starts in the early Republican period. I mean, these kind of objects, of course, marking practices in general are way older than that, but this kind of objects really appears in the early Republican period, and then they are particularly widespread in the mid-imperial period. But the life continues, and they were used by individuals as well as institutions and communities, professional guilds or religious bodies, for example, to assert ownership, specify provenance, guarantee authenticity or integrity, especially in the context of trade, but also probably administration. And we know that this tradition of marking with stamps continued in the Byzantine Empire in the context of the control of the state over production that were destined to the army or the supply of the capital, Constantinople, or also within the activities of members of the imperial civil and military administration, or also the ecclesiastical ones. And these findings that you might see are coming or presumably coming from Asia Minor, where this kind of material is more frequent to find. Moreover, markers may have also a magical religious function, displaying prophylactic apotropaic features, and may also play a role in religious rituals. Think about the Christian Eucharistic breast stamps, for example. So what is really important and must be stressed is that the mark transfers the identity of the creator, of the owner, onto the object, but it also determines a transformation of the status of the object. So we not only have an authentication of the object, but also possibly a religious value that is transferred to the object. So for this reason, the importance of studying marks and markers goes really beyond the sphere of economics and trade, and can also speak to us about the self-representation practices. So what is the corpus that the SINIT project is dealing with? An initial quantitative estimate of the edited material that was available for the Italian regions covered by the project counted about 1,200 specimens, and currently the SINIT corpus counts more than 100 records, about half of which are sufficiently too well documented. That means that are known at least by photographs. And of course, it goes without saying that signacula, let's say, that are directly documented can be supplemented by the stamped object that witness to the signacula that are now lost. What was the state of the art when the project started? Studies on marker and signacula have indeed multiplied over the last 20 years, but the literature has significant limitations, both in geographical and chronological terms. We either deal only with Roman material or with late antique and Byzantine material. There is a rather generalized scarce interest for the archaeological context of discovery of this material, and the multilingual aspect is somehow, let's say, overlooked by literature. The only notable exception is a very very, very important and forthcoming book by Dr. Ilenia Gradante on the Signacula in Sicily, which should come out in later this year. So the idea was really to try and build on the work that had still already been done, but try and organize this body of research and knowledge to make the most of the information potential and try and study these practices and these objects throughout their historical development. So the starting point was, again, to try and build a database of Signacula, which is currently limited to Greek and Latin, but hopefully will extend to other languages, which would cover the material from the Roman to the post-Roman era. Now, why one would create another sector-specific documentary database, given that are already many general purpose or very comprehensive digital platforms, and Chiara already mentioned some of them: Ego, Epigraphic Database Roma, Epigraphic Database Adelberg, etc. Let's say that beyond the specific features of each of these aggregators, the material of Signacula, this category, has been rather neglected and tends to go unnoticed. And it is not always easily found through the searches. The cataloging criteria are necessarily very broad, so they might overlook or oversimplify certain aspects of this kind of material. And the idea is also that a database of Signacula would complement the online corpora of impressions that already exist. Think about Lateres project for the bricks, or SEIPAC for the amphore, and could be directly comparable with other materials, the sigillographic corpora, for example. So the objectives of the projects are threefold. First is to try and establish a more comprehensive and more precise dating protocol, which would try and unlock the full potential of this material as historical sources. And the idea is to try and combine as many as possible indicators based on the integration of material and textual analysis. So stylistic, paleographic criteria, morphology, contextual elements, try and use multivariate statistics, try with cluster analysis or factor analysis, for example, to try and identify if there are recurring patterns of variable that can help us in better contextualizing the objects. The second point is to try and study the evolving linguistic partners, their contribution to the making of specific local identities by studying the languages and the formula that are used on this kind of material from the Roman period well into the Byzantine Italy, and try and use such a long period and the benchmark of Italy as a case study. And this, because again, even if the texts are very short, it's mainly the name of the person, or somehow, or sometimes wishing formulas that are used. Still, we can notice linguistic choices, spelling mistakes, for example, phonetic renderings, popular expressions, transliterations, borrowings, that can shed light on the modes of intercommunication between the owner of the signaculum, of course, but also and the people that are seeing, interpreting, and reading the mark. And ideally, the third point is that one would try and see the evolution of marking practices from the diachronical perspective, would allow to track over changes in the functions and form of signacula. So how marking practices have changed over time. Did they decrease? Did they sectorize in relation to the economic activities, but also in relation to the cultural transformations of the area under analysis? So how would we try and build a digital infrastructure that could help us analyzing all this data? As I said, it's a database, an open access database that will be hosted by the facilities of the École française de Rome, which is my host institution. The signaculum itself is not, it's an object-bearing text, of course, and as such can show a certain complexity that can be organized hierarchically, let's say. And so encoding this kind of objects requires a data model that would be capable of capturing both the physical and textual dimensions. There are two main approaches that are available, roughly speaking, the relational one, the relational database, and the non-relational one. A relational database would mean tables, would offer better performance for quantitative queries. I can isolate and distinguish all the different attributes, but it also entails a more complex structure, a heavier structure, many joins, and also impose a structural rigidity. A table cannot always easily represent exceptions, for example, or complex textual variations. And so it's a schema that could be difficult to read for those working with historical data. On the other hand, using XML TI allows for the hierarchical nesting of the information and mirrors the object room structure. And moreover, is the standard which is now adopted by the epigraphic community. We're talking about EpiDoc, and also the sigillographic community. We are talking about CGDoc, and thus would allow interoperability and long-term sustainability for the project and for this kind of material. So the idea was a relational model would have had certain advantages, but the fact that I would stress the possibility for this material, inscribed objects, to be compared with inscriptions and with seal, actually determined my choice in joining the EpiDoc community and choosing an XML structure. So the chosen solution is somehow a methodological compromise between exhaustiveness and sustainability. The Cenati schema does adhere to the EpiDoc's principles and the syntax, but it has been made as much analytical as possible. So each field is encoded as a discrete element rather than embedded in a running prose. And of course, the semantic attributes are used systematically and are linked to external control vocabularies. Chiara mentioned before the LOD and the Eagle vocabularies and the fair epigraphy vocabularies. And so there are, of course, specific adaptations, but let's say the idea is really to render and to represent in the most analytical way the information so that they can be more easily queried in the end. So it's a still hierarchical XML model, but with a, I would say, cozy relational dimension, which is designed for analytical reading and a bit more query-friendly structure than a standard EpiDoc edition. Though it requires, of course, a little bit more time to record and maintain. As I said, this is a quick overview of the database structure. As you see, as I said, the choice of the EpiDoc and CGDoc also, it's really based on the fact that they are the established standards for digital epigraphy and sigillography nowadays. And so this will facilitate the future integration of this kind of material with inscriptions and sigillographic corpora. And I spare you the details because you've already seen, you already had a taste of EpiDoc structure with Chiara. But what I would like to point out is the morphological aspects, I would say the aspects of the schema that are particularly emphasized in Cenati schema. So the morphological features, the shape, the I don't know if you can see the my pointer, but let's say the idea is to describe very much in detail and to refer always to reference corpora, the shape, the precise dimension, to record the state of preservation and any information that could give us information about the use, the former use of this kind of material, or on the contrary, if we are in front of a forgery, for example, describing the decoration and the script. So trying and highlighting the typology of the letters, for example, as much as possible, and the decorative elements, of course, that can be integrated, and in this case they are recorded and encoded as glyphs again. And this kind of typological grouping is used as a basis for trying and identifying, wherever possible, workshops, meaning try and bypass the element of the geographical provenance and try and group the material over stylistic criteria, or as much as possible. And try and clustering material with a view for future archaeometric analysis, for example. So for example, here we have a grouping based on the letter morphology. And to give you an example of a grouping based on on squared element encoded in the letters, we can see that there are some objects belonging to different collections, probably of we don't know the provenance of these objects, but they can be compared. They're comparable in terms of the style of the letterings. And another element which is really highlighted in this kind of material is really also the context and the provenance. As we said, whenever known, the archaeological context and the going much in detail in the type of archaeological context in which this kind of material was used could give us more information on the context of use of this material. Other elements, of course, are the historiographical and prosopographical elements and the formula that are used. So personal names, titles, formulas are also encoded. Now, while of course, there are internal cross-reference elements that can allow for cross-reference of elements within the same record or between objects that are sharing the same owner, the same formula, the same matrix within the corpus. So all this kind of elements is, of course, encoded. Such analytical structure has allowed, on top of that, to map what exists, let's say the record, into Dublin Core, which is another metadata schema, metadata standard for publication via Omeka. Omeka is a publisher. At the moment, there's only 25. It's a test run of 25 items, but the choice of Omeka instead of other publishers that could be found. FS is one of them, for example, but there are others. Is that because this kind of platforms allows to focus very much on the images and on the core metadata. It allows for a basic filtering and also, and last but not least, is also free and open source software, which is hosted by National Repository. And given the temporal limits of the EU fundings and the uncertainties regarding the management of the database in the future, such solutions, open access free solutions like Omeka, offer an easier to handle and potentially more durable and stable underlying structure for maintaining the database. Here is an overview of a selection of the metadata that are displayed. You can see, of course, the contributor, the identifier, the rights holder, the measurements, the prosopographical elements, the proposed datation, and of course the diplomatic and the editorial transcriptions and the translations, together with a reference to the available bibliography, if this material has already been published, of course. Now, to conclude, so CENIT would like to offer the first cross-period multilingual corpus of signacula from Roman and Byzantine Italy, and of course would like to open to further enrichment beyond such geographical scope, combining the epidoc encoding with a quasi-relational analytical structure that is designed for comparability with other epigraphic and sigillographic corpora, the existing one, Eagle, CGDoc, Lateres, SAPAC, etc. SignIt and try to develop a framework for the systematic study of signacula as historical sources, that is, by integrating material, epigraphic, and contextual data within a single open access digital infrastructure. And of course, the approach adapts from the existing standard, that is EpiDoc, rather than building from scratch, but it really pushes forward a greater analytical granularity. And what is useful probably for you as well is that this model is intended to be transferable to other corpora of small inscribed objects, where the same tension between textual edition and database functionality arises. So metal stamps, brick stamps, signet rings, amphorae, titoli, etc. Several methodological choices were made here that can be of practical interest if you want to start and build a database of your own. The use of semantic attributes, control vocabulary to enable cross-referencing without a relational schema, as something that has already been highlighted also by Chiara in Mappola. The borrowing of elements across the standards from EpiDoc, but also from CGDoc, for example, to try and suit the specific nature of the material, and also the decision to try to choose a publisher which would be the more lightweight, the more sustainable alternative compared to complex platform. Hopefully, but it's the hope of everybody, I would say, such a database will not end up in a digital wreck or a relic, but is really intended to become a common and accessible platform for people interested in the study of marking practices from Rome to Byzantium. And of course, it's still work in progress. So the database will be online in 3 months, and hopefully will be a starting point for further research. Let's move to the assignment. So I really would like to come to the basics, to the very starting point of a reflection in how building a database, that is to try and develop the most comprehensive schema that is possible for describing an object, so that we can anticipate potential scientific questions that might not have been considered yet. It is important when we try and build a database that we ask ourselves what questions we would like to answer, but also trying and anticipate as much as possible, because let's say completing and adding information to a data set after everything has been done, after the data collection has been made, is really a tough situation in which one can find himself. So really try and consider both elements, and the idea is to as an example, to have a look at this material, which is already online. This material that has been published within the framework of an ERC project, Crossreads, dealing with epigraphical culture, multilingual epigraphical culture in Sicily, and we have several examples and online available images of this kind of signacula. And the idea is that you try and identify as many attributes, as many categories of data that you would like to use to describe this kind of material. That means visible, morphological, things that you can measure, things that you can see, but also in abstract, so historical information, prosopographical information, and that you consider important to describe. And then try and think about the choice that you've made. I myself stop here, and I thank you for your attention.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. Okay, here we are. So thank you, Lucia, and thank you, Chiara and Lucia. So we have, so 2 important projects, and also for our students, this is interesting. So the main topic today was digital editions of text-bearing objects, and we have seen different kinds of, let's say, objects. So the first, the research question behind the first is the poetic landscape, poetry, verse, inscriptions. And now we have seen another project with a specific kind of objects, signacula. There are also other research questions, the multilingual aspect, and also the geographical and the chronological aspect. So, but I think that we can open our discussion, and I have a few questions, but I think that we can start with questions in our chat. And so remember that you can ask your questions in the chat on YouTube for those of us following us now. And there is a first question, I think, I don't know if this is a student of Martina, so I will try to show the first part here of the question for our audience. So I'm pretty much a novice in both epigraphy and XML, but when playing around with Epidoc, trying to transcribe the Delphic hymns, which have superscript characters denoting musical notes, I noticed, and then I have to move to the second part, that FS did not seem to support the Ruby tag. I know they have a rare expression, but I was wondering whether in Mappola, a very inspiring project for sure, this would be possible. So I think this is a question for Chiara.
Yes, so thank you for this question. Actually, it's very, very interesting. Unfortunately, we are not encoding the notation because at least in the inscriptions there are no notations. There will be probably one, and we haven't dealt with it yet. But this would be a very interesting topic. So I would really be really interested to hear more about your project and how you are encoding it. It doesn't matter if it's not. I don't think the tag, the Ruby tag is ever been used in Epidoc. So we should check it, and I don't think it's this is in TI, so we could of course find a solution for that. If somebody hasn't found it yet, I would suggest maybe to ask the question in the markup list. That would be a good starting point, because this is very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I don't have an answer for this question exactly. Of course, the markup list is the perfect place for answering this question, and I don't know if in our group here also in the chat there is someone else who is able to answer this question. Yes. So in the meantime, okay, if there are no other questions, so we can wait for other questions. So I have a few questions. So let's try. So let's start with Chiara. So I have a few notes here. So the two things. So you mentioned, and okay, of course. Okay, we have an answer. We have Gabriel Bodar in our audience today. Yes, exactly. This was also my my comment. But anyway, so
I found it. I checked the TI guidelines before when I saw the comment.
Yes,
I found it. It exists.
Yes. Okay, so we learn in every new session of Sunoikisis. Okay, so in the meantime, I will go on with a few questions. So Chiara, you mentioned, of course, there are many, many possible questions, and both projects are very rich of questions and comments. But the first thing, so in terms of, the first is about the Trismegistos, because you are ingesting Trismegistos IDs, but the question, because to be honest now, I don't remember the coverage of Trismegistos in terms of inscriptions. So, so you are looking for IDs if your inscriptions are in Trismegistos, but if they are not, are you adding your inscriptions to Trismegistos, and Trismegistos is generating new IDs, and then you have a link to them? So your project is contributing to Trismegistos.
Yes, that's the idea. Yes, of course.
Okay, exactly.
Yes.
No, this is important. Yeah, please.
No,
Okay.
so it is just we try to have all Trismegistus numbers, like we assign them as soon as we enter the inscriptions, and of course we provide we'll enter new inscriptions in Trismegistus if they are not there yet. Yes.
Okay, excellent. So in fact, also for our audience, so we know that Trismegistos is a big portal, and of course is known also, well, for not only for papyri, but now there is also a significant coverage in terms of inscriptions, and this is an example where Mappola can contribute with thanks to Trismegistos.
Yes, I would say that most of the inscriptions are already in Trismegistus. There are very few cases when they are not in Trismegistus yet. So,
okay, this is interesting because I'm not, and so I'm asking because I'm not up to date in terms of inscriptions for Trismegistus. I remember that now, quite many years ago, with Marc Lepau, we discussed about the addition of inscriptions. It's interesting to see that now we have many inscriptions there, and so your project shows that. So this is interesting. And then I have a question about are you producing new editions of your inscriptions? So this is the first question. And then you have, let's say, a connection with Musisque d'Eoque, because of course Musisque d'Eoque also includes verse inscriptions, which is an interesting thing, of course, how this text can be studied also in literature. And Musisque d'Eoque is mainly, the focus is mainly on that, but in that case, so there is, I mean, so you're using the editions of Musisque d'Eoque, there is an overlap, and then are you producing new editions or using already extant editions?
Yes, so the question on the editions, no, we are not providing new editions in Mappola unless this edition corresponds to a PhD thesis that have been carried out in Mappola. Then yes, of course, we provide the edition that is in the PhD thesis or our own publications, but these enter Mappola only in the moment when the papers are published. So no, we don't have capacity and time to do this, but we try to provide the best text as possible, comparing also editions that are available. Yes, that's like more or less what is also is EDR is doing. That is not really an edition, but trying to provide the best text as possible. And Musisque d'Eoque, yes, we enter all links to Musisque d'Eoque. This is very useful. We are not making a metrical scansion in Mappola. So for metrical scansion, Musisque d'Eoque, of course, sometimes is not that precise, but because it's automatically generated, but it's very, very useful, and also for students, because I know, like, our students are history students, they are not so used to read verse inscriptions, so we are working on multiple levels, and this is a very difficult one. So having the possibility to check on Musisque d'Eoque the verses and also the literary parallels to the text they are working on, it's very, very useful. Yes.
Yes, okay, no, thank you. And yes, of course, and then Pedecerto, of course, is a fundamental tool in, as you were showing, in Musisque d'Eoque for this purpose. And again, as I was saying before, of course, this, again, going beyond, let's say, genres, I mean, or at least the text we study, of course, here we have a clear connection between inscriptions, epigraphy, and literature. And I think that these verse inscriptions are an interesting connection between the two fields. The question about editions, of course, this is important because, of course, this is an unusual question, but these, our digital projects, the first important fundamental aspect is to add digital data, which is already a lot, because also if you are not producing a new edition, in any case, these projects, they are creating first digital data, which are fundamental today. And in any case, I think there is always an editorial component, because also when you use Epidoc, in the end, you have to interpret this text. So there is always an editorial aspect. This is an edition. Of course, there is a big discussion, as you know, in our community. What do we mean by digital edition? But this is not just about, let's say, transferring an inscription for a print edition to a digital one. It's something more than that. Of course, in the community, as you said, this is not in our capacity, but because your goal is to generate such a database. But in the end, those choices, Epidoc, and then also the vocabulary, this is an editorial part, I think. And I'm sure that you have many difficult questions in your project. I'm sure about that, because every project, when we try to use these, let's say, standards and these formats, there are always open questions. And so in the end, we are editors responsible for our digital choices. So, and then it's interesting that in any case, of course, you can, include new editions if there are PhD candidates working. And we begin to see a pure newborn digital edition. So, and maybe they can be added, of course, to your project. And then the last question is about, this is interesting, about the Eagle and FAIR vocabulary. So, a question is, of course, you are using both vocabulary. So if I understood, you started with Eagle because FAIR should include Epidoc, but now you're using both, or you're moving from Epidoc to FAIR. So how is the current situation?
So the situation now is still that we just have Eagle, because of course FAIR didn't exist when we started planning the database. What I would like to do is to add also to use both at some point, to have both FAIR and Eagle. So not to replace Eagle with FAIR, but to have both. By now, the vocabularies that we can possibly use are the language, the state of, the type of inscription, and the execution technique. These are the three vocabularies that FAIR has. And this is clearly like a step forward. After Eagle, they have this hierarchy in the vocabulary. So that's also what we are trying to do with the verse types, so to have an upper level and lower level. And this is, of course, very useful also if we are dealing with, it's not case of Mappola, but for other epigraphic projects that might have different needs from Greek and Latin epigraphy, and might need so broader categories. And I think the FAIR project has done a very, very great job. So.
Yeah, exactly. So this is another complex part of our work. So there are, specific needs in specific projects of epigraphy, but of course, one of the goals is try to connect them. I remember, again, I'm older than you, so I remember discussions in the past, also in the projects EDR, epigraphic database, around so the complexities of, let's say, creating. So using also the Latin language for the traditional scheda epigraphic, and I have to use the Italian expression, which is quite significant for epigraphers, especially for those working on Latin inscriptions. So now, but fortunately now, of course, Eagle, Epidoc, so we have a lot, but now I think that with FAIR, we are really enlarging the possibilities, and these ontologies are also, fundamental, especially because we need to connect different projects in terms of languages and kinds of objects, still preserving, of course, the needs of specific kinds of inscriptions. Okay, so thank you, Chiara. So I think really there is a lot, and also for our students, I think that this is interesting. So you have And this is also valid, of course, for the project of Lucia, because I think that you have similar questions. And also in the exercise, but also this is already an exercise to also try to understand this, this vocabulary, and then how to encode. This is already an exercise, and then looking for the vocabulary is already a complex, activity. Then I don't know if in the meantime there are other questions in our group. And so also, Lucia, thank you. I have been learning a lot about signacula. So, and I think you have, so this is interesting because, of course, here, so we have also the multilingual aspect, if I understood, and then there is, of course, a geographical perspective, Roman and Byzantine Italy. So in this case, of course, also Chiara, in your case, you have places, you have people, you mentioned them in your text, but of course, in Sign It, there is a specific focus now on Roman and Byzantine Italy, and also the multilingual component. So how do you deal with that? I don't know if I lost something of your presentation, but I'm interested in this aspect of the multilingual component of your objects.
Well, basically the idea is to encode the languages and try and encode, well, not just Greek and Latin, of course, but try and highlight whenever, for example, a Greek-canic name, so a name of supposed Greek origin is used using a Latin script, whenever, which is rarer, but it's not unfrequent to find Roman Latin names written with a Greek script, for example. So whenever this kind of elements occurs, encode this and highlight this in order to be able to make statistics. I run very quickly on the geographical part. One of the biggest problems that actually came up, but it's something that you would actually appreciate only when the project is ongoing, actually, is that for much of the material actually has an uncertain origin, because much of the available material, especially the material that is coming from museum collections or private collections, belongs to very old collections. And so the rate of dispersion and the origin is not very, it's very difficult to determine in much of these cases. And it's something that, and despite that, it's still possible for at least a couple of regions which have a rather clear provenance for historical reasons and for geographical reasons. So one is Sicily, and the other one's is the area of Rimini. The local collections, the local museum collection in Rimini, by chance happened to come from the very neighborhood of the city, which is not that astonishing if you consider the importance of the city had in Roman times. And Sicily, okay, the insularity, the character of an island probably facilitates the concentration and the relative stability of the material on the very territory. But otherwise, for the rest of the areas considered by the project, I had to scale up a little bit the expectations, and probably eventually I will add material from other regions that are still characterized by pronounced bilingualism. Consider just the city of Rome, for example, which is in itself a multilingual center. And so probably eventually there will be an evaluation of the use of Greek within the peninsula rather than trying and highlight that much the continuity. It is the continuity of the Greek presence is probably visible in certain selected areas, but not in all those that are considered by the project, because of the difficulty in ascertaining the provenance, and because of the difficulty also in accessing the material sometimes. So
Okay, so thank you for this. So because you, and then again for our students, but not only, also for us. This is very interesting because these texts are short text. This is a characteristic of many inscriptions, and this is signacula. They are short text, but as you can see from what you said, there is a richness in terms, the language is extremely interesting because this practice of expressing certain names in another script. So these, so we can get many, well, I can't say conclusions, but we can, of course, investigate these. I mean, the use of this language is a reflection, of course, of people moving, so the use of these names. So the multilingual aspect in this case is extremely interesting. So also how these marking practices, I'm citing an expression you used in your slides. Marking practice is short text, but they can reveal a lot. These are not long text, but there are, let's say, many stories behind them, and the multilingual aspect is interesting. And then the geography, of course, is a problem for these objects. So the provenance, of course, we have these collections. This is a usual problem, of course, for certain places like Rimini, and then for Sicily, there may be a connection, but in other cases, of course, we don't know where these collections come from. I'm not an expert of signacula, but this is a usual problem for many other, let's say, inscriptions, especially for small objects. So I think this is super interesting. And the text, so there are, so in this case, these objects are usually entirely preserved, but there are abbreviations, so there are complexities, I imagine, for the text. And then, of course, you can represent them in using Epidoc because we have now conventions also for that part. So in this sense, texts are completely preserved. They are short, but they are completely preserved. And yes, so... okay, so okay, I have no, so now is 6:57, so we are coming to an end, and we already have a comment in our chat. Okay, of course, thank you. And so I don't know if we have other comments. If Chiara, Lucia, you want to add something else? Okay, of course. So as I said, you have a very rich class outline. You have the links to the readings, further readings, the projects. The slides are already in GitHub. So thank you, Chiara and Lucia, for providing us with the slides, and also the two exercises. And I think there is a lot, also considering the project, navigating in these databases, you can really experiment a lot. So now our time, I should say, is over. And as I said, so Martina Filosa was not able to be with us today. I have to say that I helped her in this term, but she's the main person for this summer term of Sunoikis Digital Classics, and I'm very happy about that because Sunoikis is growing. So we have other, let's say, universities where Sunoikis is also offered, and in this semester, Martina has students in Köln, and also for Martina students, of course, you can ask Martina, but I think you have everything for your work. So this is the last session for this term. We are working for other terms, of course. We continue to offer Sunoikisis. I don't think in the fall and in the winter, but definitely next spring and next summer there will be other programs. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, Chiara, Lucia, thank you very much for joining us, for really introducing your projects. They are very important projects, super interesting. And so it's now it's over. So I wish everybody a great summer, of course, and also to Chiara and Lucia, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.